The United States is overhauling its nuclear strategy to prepare for future conflicts with China and Russia, including an option for immediate launch. An NBC report says the Department of Defense may revamp its nuclear strategy, greatly expanding the role of tactical nuclear weapons for potential conflicts with China and Russia. This nuclear strategy overhaul is reportedly being led by Elbridge Colby, the former Deputy Assistant Secretary for Defense Policy, who is known for planning defense policies during the Trump administration. According to the NBC report, the core of the new strategy is to move away from the existing structure where the president has to choose between conventional military force and a large-scale strategic nuclear attack in a nuclear crisis, and instead to secure a wider range of military options. So it seems that the nuclear strategy is being revised to provide the political leadership with a broader range of actual options for using nuclear weapons. When we usually think of nuclear war, we imagine large-scale nuclear missile launches like the massive strategic nuclear attack seen in Fallout. However, the US considers the possibility of such large-scale attacks to be very low, so they believe it's more realistic to always provide the option of small-scale tactical nuclear strikes. Is it Deputy Secretary Colby's argument that this is to prepare for future conflicts? It's not confirmed yet, but since the person who has been shaping the Trump administration's defense strategy so far is directly leading this, it seems highly likely that this nuclear strategy will also be adopted. If this strategic overhaul is finalized, South Korea and Japan will be directly affected. The original purpose of the US revising its nuclear strategy is not to actually start a nuclear war and bring about catastrophe. It's the fact that the United States can deploy its nuclear weapons in real operations at any time depending on the situation. The intention is to make this fact clear to the outside world, to deter hostile states from provoking in the first place, and to secure strong deterrence against war. This reorganization mainly targets China and Russia, whose power is growing fast. The United States is highly likely to consider redeploying tactical nuclear weapons to South Korea and Japan, which are geographically very close to China and Russia, or sharing related capabilities as a key means to block the threats from these two major powers. The aim of the new nuclear strategy is to make China and Russia firmly believe that even if the US mainland is not directly attacked, the US is always ready to use nuclear weapons if its allies are in crisis. Tactical nuclear weapons were once deployed in South Korea. Since 1958, the US forces in Korea operated tactical nuclear weapons. In 1991, all tactical nuclear weapons were withdrawn under the Joint Declaration on the Denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. If the nuclear strategy shifts, redeploying tactical nuclear weapons could be reconsidered. Despite the 1991 Joint Declaration on the Denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, North Korea is already nuclear armed. We definitely need to respond to that as well. The US Extended Deterrence System assures allies like South Korea or Japan that a nuclear attack on them will be treated as an attack on the US itself, prompting a strong retaliation. However, there have long been doubts about whether the United States would risk its own major cities by launching large-scale strategic nuclear weapons in response if China or Russia conducted a limited nuclear attack or tactical provocation. The credibility of extended deterrence, questioned by allies and adversaries, is open to interpretation. The United States is addressing this by broadening practical response options focused on tactical nuclear weapons. Of course, there is some opposition from certain quarters. Tactical nuclear weapons are clearly less powerful and have a more limited range than strategic nuclear weapons, which makes them relatively easier for political leaders to use. However, since the likelihood of using nuclear weapons increases, there is a higher risk that it could escalate into a nuclear war. Still, the United States appears determined to push this through. That's because China's nuclear capabilities are expanding explosively. The US Department of Defense has stated that China will have more than 600 nuclear warheads operational by mid-2024. That's already a significant increase. Still, China is expected to have over 1,000 nuclear warheads by 2030 and keep expanding its nuclear capabilities through at least 2035. The US Department of Defense sees China's actions as efforts to move closer to parity with US nuclear capabilities. According to a report published by the US Department of Defense, this expansion means that China is claiming the ability to inflict a much higher level of overwhelming damage on its adversaries in the event of a nuclear exchange. It also showed the United States is pursuing this. The US Department of Defense has stated that China possesses the world's most advanced hypersonic missiles. For the United States, China is clearly a serious threat. With China expanding its nuclear capabilities, the United States must quickly upgrade its own nuclear forces in response. Recently, China has quickly boosted its military by expanding its hypersonic missiles, mobile intercontinental ballistic missiles, and nuclear submarines. The United States is boosting military presence in key Indo-Pacific areas like Guam, Japan, and the Philippines to maintain its strong stance against China. The most critical factor to watch out for here is the possibility that China, backed by its enhanced nuclear capabilities, might undertake risky military actions. As China's nuclear retaliation capabilities become more advanced, there is a risk that the United States, being aware of the threat of a nuclear attack on its own homeland, may hesitate or be reluctant to intervene militarily on behalf of its Asian allies. This means that the way Russia used nuclear threats against Europe to block direct Western military intervention in the Ukraine crisis could be repeated in East Asia as well. The moment China judges that it can use its powerful nuclear forces as a kind of shield to undermine America's will to defend, US allies and partner countries in the Asian region will face an unprecedented security threat. If China thinks the risk of direct conflict with the United States is lower, it may use more aggressive military pressure on neighboring allies. This scenario is not just speculation, but a real security challenge that is being seriously analyzed by the Hudson Institute, a key diplomatic and security think tank located in Washington, D.C. U.S. policy experts are increasingly warning through reports and discussions that China's nuclear buildup is destabilizing East Asia's security order. Very recently, China even launched an SLBM into international waters in the Pacific. The Chinese military said it successfully launched an SLBM carrying a training dummy warhead into the Pacific from a single strategic nuclear submarine. This missile is believed to be an SLBM with a range of up to 10,000 kilometers. At that time, although it did not pass through South Korean airspace because South Korea is a neighboring country, China did notify in advance about the SLBM launch. Pacific countries strongly protested against this, which is the problem. Immediately, Penny, the Australian foreign minister, stated that such actions undermine regional stability. She said that Australia sees this test launch as part of China's rapid military buildup, and it clearly shows a lack of transparency and assurance about China's intentions, which is what countries in the region expect. The Japanese government expressed serious concern over China's increased military activity and urged China to reconsider further test launches. South Korea did not issue any particular statement. As China's nuclear capabilities are being strengthened like this, the United States is also hurriedly rebuilding its own nuclear forces. China's plan to boost nuclear warheads and launch SLBMs into the Pacific stems from a major change in its security policy. In the past, China publicly declared a no first use policy, stating that it would not use nuclear weapons first unless the other side used them first. It was an attitude of maintaining only the minimum nuclear force necessary for defensive purposes. However, recently, as China has rapidly completed its nuclear triad system, including hypersonic missiles, mobile intercontinental ballistic missiles, and nuclear-powered submarines, the prevailing assessment is that the previous principle has become virtually meaningless. This is because, by securing powerful preemptive strike capabilities and diversified means of operation, China has shifted to a structure where it can even consider the option of neutralizing the opponent's key military facilities first in the event of a contingency. China's launch of an SLBM into the Pacific high seas also has a strategic purpose that goes beyond a simple show of force. This action showcases China's strong nuclear power projection capability beyond the first and second island chains, its East Asian maritime defense lines. This effort aims to implement the anti-access and area denial strategy, which seeks to block US aircraft carriers and underwater assets from entering the Taiwan Strait or South China Sea during a military conflict. This strategy aims to build a huge defensive wall backed by nuclear forces to completely block US access to the Pacific, not just set up a physical barrier. The strategic intention is to preemptively block the US willingness to intervene in support of its allies by sending a warning that if US military forces enter, they would have to risk a full-scale nuclear conflict. If the US changes its nuclear strategy this way, it could better deter China by allowing more flexibility with tactical nuclear weapons.